Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to Elite Dangerous. So here we are in 2018, over 3 years since the game's initial release back in December of 2014. Elite then is often cited as having a very slow development, and for the most part this is a statement that has more or less unanimous agreement right across the board. The debate, however, comes in when people discuss whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. At any rate, in mid-2015 I made a video on my top 10 most anticipated features for Elite. I thought now would be a great time to go back to that video and see just how many of those features we now have here in 2018 and how many of them we still are waiting for, and also whether or not any of them are completely missing in action. This is going to be a two-part video. Here then is a look at how Elite has developed across the past few years. The evolution of space stations was my 10th most anticipated feature back in mid-2015 when I said, what is space without space stations? Back then, Elite was distinctly lacking in variety in terms of space stations. There was the Orbis space station, the Ocellus space station, not many of them, the iconic Coriolis station, and of course a few outposts with not a huge amount of variation between any of them. Back then there was no planetary bases, and all the interiors of the stations we could land in were basically the same interior, just with different colours. In the background you can see the trailer for patch 1.1, which was community goals and showed off the deployment of a space station. Whilst it was never to arrive in the game in quite that form, it did give some indications as to the future of the game, and here is some concept art as well. All in all then, in mid-2015, the game was very sparse in terms of what was available for us to travel to and dock at. So this has all changed rather significantly over the past few years, with a huge variety in stations. Right here is the asteroid base. These were in the very early concept art for the game back during the Kickstarter period, I believe, and whilst many people hoped there would be hidden pirate bases and things like that, nonetheless it's very nice to have them, and they do look quite different depending on where you actually go. Megaships brought with them a further variety in dockable platforms. Some of them of course are not dockable, many however actually are. Megaships then come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes, from the asteroid one you saw just now, right through to research, scientific, tourist, prisoner, transport and many others. Again, going back to early concept art for Elite Dangerous, they often showed dry docks outside stations with docked capital ships. Now these were absent from the game for a very long time, but they are now very much in the game, and it's not uncommon to come across scenes like this one. Now earlier on I mentioned the lack of variety in station interior variations, at least back during the early stages of the game. Back during early 2015 and the late 2014 of the game's release, all station interiors looked the same. But that's no longer the case. You now have industrial, high-tech, agricultural as well as tourist varieties. Now of course people could quite rightly point out that all of this is pretty much superficial changes to the game, but nonetheless they do add immensely to the game's atmosphere. And more recently, changes to stations have indeed brought new gameplay with them. The attacked stations, these ones destroyed by Thargoids out in the Pleiades cluster, brought with them the need to rescue passengers or trapped people within inside of them. Stations under repair meanwhile need commodities delivered before they can be brought back to a good status. There's also the megaship related gameplay arriving with Chapter 1 of Beyond, and of course we shouldn't forget the planetary bases that came with the initial release of Horizons. So then, development on stations along with other large space structures has certainly taken massive leaps forward over the past few years. There's still a lot more that can be done though, but with recent changes also focusing on gameplay, it's all starting to look rather good. Ever since their initial concept release, the Ori Maps has been something I've been very excited for to see within Elite Dangerous. Here we are many years later, and unfortunately they're still not in the game, and unfortunately based on recent statements from Frontier, it seems they may never actually even be in the game. It's a disappointment in many ways. Not only were these an alternative way to visually represent what's going on within the game and within each system, they also represented the potential for huge gameplay opportunities. But gameplay associated to maps is something I've talked about in previous videos, so I won't go into it again here. All that said, there have been a lot of improvements to the maps within Elite, and whilst they certainly are not quite on the visual splendour of an Ori map, they do bring with them an entire wealth of information, and they're certainly very much becoming a part of the gameplay. The new filters for commodities coming in Chapter 1 of Beyond are a great example of this. Back in 2015 then, the Ori Map was my 9th most anticipated feature for the future of the game, and unfortunately it looks as though it will still have to remain on a feature for the future list.
I suppose one of the key things about passengers is they essentially they just naturally lead on to missions.
For me, passenger missions represented something new and different for the game, and therefore they made position 8 for my future feature list. My thoughts then were that passengers could introduce all manner of gameplay, as they not only requested you to take them to a huge variety of locations, but they also brought in dynamic mission opportunities. Ultimately, that is precisely what we got, after a fashion, but the version of passengers we did get felt a lot less alive than the ones in my imagination, who would have had interesting personalities and brought variety to space travel. The bottom line though, is that passenger missions are just fine and offer yet another alternative activity within the game. Of course, they've also been a great source of income for players, with massive credit boons from Quince through to Raya and even beyond. The original concept art for trading made the proposition of the marketplace look very interesting indeed. Back during 2015, the commodity market screen was extremely on the light side, and very much felt like a placeholder. It seemed inevitable then that changes to the system would turn up sooner or later, so trading improvements have long been a highly anticipated feature. Now Chapter 1 of Beyond makes some pretty significant step towards making these improvements a reality, with the changes to the galaxy map allowing you to not only filter for commodities for markets in systems you've already visited, but they also allow you to see both import and export data. Added to this, players will also be able to view trending data for trade routes from the past 24 hours, both from the background simulation as well as revealing trade routes that other players have been using. What's more is that much of this data carries on over to the new filters that will be available on the market screen itself. So all in all, some very good changes, and they certainly bring trading that bit closer to being the great system that many hoped for. Missions then were at number 6 of my most anticipated features list. Some examples of the things I hope to see included missions to help contribute towards the construction of starports and missions to hunt down rebel players or factions. Essentially, missions that would make the galaxy feel more alive as it reacts to both your presence as well as that of other players. Now, the mission system has had numerous and significant updates over the years, although a passerby given a mere cursory glance at the game could easily be forgiven for thinking that not all that much has changed. A part of the problem here then, in some respects, could perhaps be rooted in the game's lack of persistence for NPCs, instead relying upon a system where your assassination target, for example, will only spawn in at a set time, and this sense of randomness tends to overlay a good number of the missions. In principle, it's something that hasn't really changed all that much since the game's release. However, if we keep our focus firmly within the context of the limits of the game, then Frontier have certainly made some significant improvements to the mission system. Linked or follow-on missions are now a thing, where a faction would offer you a mission tangentially related to other work you've carried out for them, or hang around in space for a while, or indeed any other location, and chances are you will be contacted in a message form with an offer for a mission. Missions can now be offered when you're docked at stations, and many of these offered significant rewards, ultimately totaling sometimes in the hundreds of millions of credits. The missions from the engineers Ramtar and Professor Padin are great examples of this. What's more, the upcoming update will bring wing missions, the ability to hunt down Thargoids for rewards, in addition to a choice of rewards upon completing a mission. All indicators then suggest that Frontier are far from finished with the mission system, which certainly bodes well for the future. Much like improved missions, a dynamic and evolving galaxy was pretty high up on my most anticipated features list. Power play and the background simulation were to offer some of this, but there certainly was a strong desire to see far more, such as system state changes having a very real effect on the nature of gameplay within them. Now overall, very little had actually changed within the Elite Dangerous Galaxy between the release of the game and the video I made mid-2015, and of course this largely made sense, as at that point the game had only been released for a little over 6 months. Things I hoped to see was a galaxy that grew and evolved both to player actions as well as its own internal logic and story. Things really began to change in the fourth quarter of 2015 as new stations began to be constructed as a result of community goals. Eventually, these started to be built outside of the original inhabited bubble. Later, a second area of human-inhabited space began to develop 26,000 light-years away from Sol in a system called Colonia. Ancient ruins have been discovered along with traces of a vast dead civilization, and Thargoids have returned along with discoveries of complex and strange planetary bases. More recently, space stations have started to fall as they come under alien attack, also offering the ability for players to repair them and bring them back online. Whilst it's true to say that many of these are certainly curated content and only occur as and when Frontier either release a patch or throw a switch, and I'd still certainly like to see system states having a hard and literal effect on all players within those systems, the past few years nevertheless have opened up the galaxy in a way that makes it feel far more alive than it did back in early 2015. And all these events and changes certainly bring the game far closer to having a living, breathing galaxy. So really, looking at the past few years of development, it's easy to see that the game has come a very long way indeed. And whilst the basic tenets of gameplay really haven't changed that much, the galaxy itself has grown and has evolved. I'll be back then very soon with part 2 of this video, and we'll have a look at the remaining top 5 most anticipated features back from 2015, and we'll see whether or not they've made it into the game, and if perhaps some of them have gone missing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.